It started as a night of laughter and camaraderie. A warm evening in Sydney, Australia, where a group of young men gathered in a backyard, sipping wine, sharing jokes, and trying to feel grown up for just a few hours. 19-year-old Sam Ballard, a vibrant rugby player with a bright future and an infectious sense of humor, was at the center of it all. The air was light, the mood buoyant, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, across the concrete patio, a small garden slug appeared, gliding slowly through the grass and moss. The teens noticed it, and in that split second, the tone of the night shifted. A dare was tossed into the circle, laughing, teasing, and daring Sam to eat the slimy creature. Everyone chuckled, thinking it harmless fun, a ridiculous prank that no one would take seriously. But Sam, always up for a challenge, always eager to impress his mates, picked up the slug. Without hesitation, he swallowed it whole, the tiny creature sliding down into his unsuspecting stomach. The crowd erupted in cheers, their laughter echoing into the night. The party went on. Sam went home, thinking nothing of it. The excitement of the evening masking the unseen danger he had just invited into his life. For the first few days, nothing seemed wrong. But soon, a creeping sense of unease began. Sam's legs ached with an intensity he had never experienced. The pain deepened, spreading and intensifying, until within weeks, walking became a struggle. Concerned and frightened, Sam and his family sought medical help, and what followed would shatter their lives. Doctors revealed a diagnosis that seemed almost impossible. The slug Sam had eaten had carried rat lungworm parasites, microscopic invaders capable of devastating the human body. These invisible killers had reached his brain, triggering a rare and aggressive infection called eosinophilic meningoencephalitis. The disease progressed rapidly, attacking his nervous system and leaving him weakened, confused, and terrified. In a matter of days, Sam slipped into a coma that would last an astonishing 420 days. For over a year, he lay in a hospital bed, his body failing him, while the world outside moved on. When he finally emerged from the haze of unconsciousness, the consequences of that single, reckless act became devastatingly clear. Sam was paralyzed from the neck down. He could no longer walk, feed himself, or breathe without mechanical assistance. His independence, his freedom, and the life he had known were gone. His mother, Katie Ballard, became his full-time caregiver, tending to him around the clock. She bathed him, fed him, and held him through nights of pain and frustration, witnessing the vibrant young man she had raised trapped inside a body that refused to obey. Friends and family visited, bringing laughter, memories, and reminders of the life Sam had lost. Even as the guilt of that night, the dare, the laughter, the tiny slug hung over them like a shadow. Despite the paralysis and the relentless medical interventions, Sam's mind remained sharp. He understood everything. He remembered the friends, the parties, the laughter, and the night that had begun so innocently but had changed everything. He communicated when he could, smiled at familiar faces, and clung to moments of connection with the people who had loved him unconditionally through the long, dark years. 8 long years passed. 8 years of hospital visits, surgeries, rehabilitation attempts, and small victories overshadowed by immense losses. Then, in 2018, surrounded by the family who had never left his side and the loyal friends who had supported him through every setback, Sam Ballard passed away. His final words whispered to his mother were heartbreakingly simple: "I love you." The world had lost not just a young man, but a story, a life forever altered, a spirit contained within a body that no longer obeyed. Sam's death became more than a tragedy. It became a chilling, cautionary tale. What had begun as a laugh, a moment of bravado, a silly dare among friends, had spiraled into a nightmare of irreversible consequences. A tiny slug, a fleeting dare, and a single choice had stolen 8 years of life, leaving grief, guilt, and heartbreak in its wake. Families, communities, and children across the world were reminded in the harshest terms. Some dares are far from harmless. A single act of recklessness can ripple through lives, leaving scars that no amount of laughter can ever erase. It was May 14, 1988 in Carroll County, Kentucky. A church youth group from Radcliffe's Assembly of God had spent the day at Kings Island Amusement Park, their bus filled with teenagers still buzzing from roller coasters, junk food, and inside jokes. As they headed home, tired but happy, the hum of the road felt safe. It was supposed to be just another long ride back to Radcliffe, but at 10:55 p.m., their world turned into fire. Coming from the opposite direction, a black Toyota pickup tore through the night traveling the wrong way down the highway. Behind the wheel was 34-year-old Larry Mahoney, a factory worker so drunk he didn't realize he was speeding directly into oncoming traffic. Seconds later, headlights met headlights, and there was no time to react. The truck slammed head-on into the bus with devastating force. The collision shattered metal, crumpled the front end, and ruptured the bus's unprotected fuel tank. At first, it seemed like a survivable crash. Almost no one had been fatally injured on impact, but then came the fire. The leaking gasoline ignited instantly, flames racing up the aisle. Panic erupted. Inside, 67 people, most of them children, scrambled to escape. The front door was jammed shut from the impact. Thick black smoke poured through the narrow aisle as the heat became unbearable. Screams filled the air, desperate cries for help, for mothers, for anyone. Survivors said the fire spread in seconds. Within 20 seconds you could feel the heat, one said. You heard kids crying, pushing, trying to get to the back. We were all jammed together. The only exit was a small rear emergency door. Everyone fought to reach it. Dozens pressed into the 12-inch wide aisle, bodies crushing together in the dark. A cooler that had been placed in the aisle only made things worse, trapping people halfway down the bus. Some tried to break the windows, but they wouldn't budge. One small woman managed to squeeze through a side window. When she looked back, the opening was filled with flames. Outside, passing drivers pulled over and tried to help. They smashed windows and dragged out as many as they could before the inferno became too fierce to approach. Within minutes, the bus was completely engulfed, a roaring fireball on the side of the highway. The children, still trapped inside, never had a chance. When firefighters finally extinguished the flames, the damage was almost too horrific to comprehend. 27 people were dead, 24 children, 2 adults, and the bus driver. 34 more were injured, many with severe burns. The youngest victims were just 10 years old. Their bodies were later found piled toward the back of the bus, all facing the same direction, all toward the only escape they could not reach. For investigators, it was one of the most disturbing scenes they'd ever encountered. No one on the bus had died from the collision itself. Every life lost that night had been claimed by smoke and fire. The 11-year-old bus, once a school vehicle, had a design flaw that turned it into a trap. The gas tank was exposed. The seat covers were made of flammable vinyl, and the exits were too few. Larry Mahoney survived the crash. His blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit. He later said he remembered nothing. Not the bar, not the highway, not the crash. In the hospital, he had to be told what he'd done. He was charged with 27 counts of murder and sentenced to 16 years in prison for manslaughter and assault. He served 9.5. In the years that followed, Kentucky changed forever. The Carrollton crash became a turning point in American road safety and in the fight against drunk driving. Some of the victims' families became leaders and mothers against drunk driving, MAD, including Carolyn Nunnally, who later became the organization's national president. Laws toughened. Buses were redesigned with stronger fuel tanks, fireproof seats, and multiple emergency exits. Today, Kentucky's school buses have 9 exits, more than any state in the country. But for those who were there, no law or reform could erase that night. Survivors spoke of nightmares, of guilt, of the smell of burning vinyl that would haunt them for decades. Parents described the unbearable silence that filled their homes afterward, bedrooms left untouched, laughter that never returned. It was supposed to be a quiet morning at the Paul Ricard circuit. No crowds, no cameras, just the sound of engines echoing across the French hills. For Elio De Angelis, it was another test session, another chance to find the edge between control and chaos. The Italian driver, often called Formula One's last gentleman racer, was known for his calm smile, his piano playing, and his ability to bring grace to a sport built on danger. But on May 14, 1986, that grace met tragedy in one of the most horrifying and heartbreaking moments Formula One had ever seen. DeAngelis had joined Brabham that season, stepping into the seat once held by Nelson Piquet. The car he was testing, the Radical BT55, was a marvel on paper. Impossibly low, sleek, designed by the brilliant Gordon Murray to cheat the wind. But brilliance can be a gamble. The car's tilted BMW engine caused constant mechanical issues, and that morning it would betray him completely. As Elio pushed the car down the long Maestro Straight, the speed climbed past 300 km/h. Then, without warning, the rear wing snapped clean off. In an instant, the car lost all downforce, the rear lifted, and the Brabham became an airborne missile. Witnesses later described it as a blur of white and blue, cartwheeling violently across the tarmac before slamming into the barriers and bursting into flames. The impact didn't kill him. That was the cruelest part. DeAngelis was still alive, trapped inside the wreckage, his body pinned, the fire growing hotter by the second. He struggled to escape, but the cockpit was crushed. Smoke filled the air, thick and suffocating, and there were no marshals nearby, no one to help him. The test session had been minimally staffed, as was common at the time. By the time someone reached the wreck, precious minutes had already slipped away. The fire spread uncontrollably, and the rescuers had no proper extinguishers, no cutting tools, no urgency protocol. DeAngelis was forced to wait 30 agonizing minutes for a medical helicopter to arrive. By then, the damage was irreversible. He had suffered only a broken collarbone and minor burns, but the smoke had done what the crash could not. He was airlifted to a hospital in Marseille, where he fought for his life for nearly 29 hours before succumbing to smoke inhalation. He was just 28 years old. The news devastated the paddock. Elio wasn't just another driver. He was deeply loved. He was known for his humility, his kindness, and the rare calm he brought to an intense world. This was a man who would sit down at a grand piano after a race and play Chopin for his teammates. He had once kept fellow drivers entertained during a strike in South Africa, filling a locked hotel with the sound of Mozart while they protested FIA's rules. To his friends, he wasn't just a racer, he was the heart of the grid. His death struck a nerve deeper than most. It wasn't the speed that killed him, or the danger that everyone in the sport accepted. It was the failure of rescue, the silence, the delay. He didn't die from impact. He died waiting for help that came too late. That truth haunted Formula One. The FIA could no longer ignore the gaps in safety during private tests. After Elio's death, emergency standards were redefined. Medical teams had to be on site during all official testing. Marshals better trained. Helicopters ready within minutes. Circuits reevaluated their designs. Paul Ricard itself was permanently shortened. The very section where Elio crashed was removed from future races, as if the circuit itself couldn't bear to repeat the past. His seat at Brabham was later taken by Derek Warwick, one of the few drivers who hadn't immediately called the team looking to replace him after the tragedy. That gesture alone spoke volumes about the type of man DeAngelis was, someone even his rivals respected too much to replace overnight. Elio's closest friend, Keke Rosberg, was shattered by the loss. The two had shared laughter, meals, and late-night talks about racing and life. At the end of that season, Rosberg quietly retired. After Elio, he said later, it didn't feel the same anymore. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a last hurrah before adulthood. On May 24, 2023, 18-year-old Cameron Robbins, fresh out of a high school, was in the Bahamas with hundreds of classmates soaking in the sun, laughter, and freedom at the Atlantis Paradise Island Resort in Nassau. The air was electric with excitement as the group boarded the pirate-themed sunset cruise, Blackbeard's Revenge, for an evening that would soon turn unimaginable. Music blared, drinks clinked, and the golden sunset bathed the sea in a warm glow, a perfect backdrop for memories meant to last a lifetime. As the boat drifted near the uninhabited Athol Island, someone dared Cameron to jump into the dark, unknown waters below. The dare started as playful teasing, a test of courage under the fading sunlight. Friends reached for him, their hands grasping at his arms in a desperate attempt to stop him, voices cracking with fear and urgency. But Cameron broke free. perhaps drawn by a reckless sense of adventure, or maybe by the bravado of youth. With a final glance at the terrified faces around him, he leapt. For a fleeting moment it seemed like a thrilling stunt. He cut through the water, swimming in the moonlit ocean, the cheers of classmates transforming abruptly into frantic screams. They threw a life preserver toward him, shouting frantic instructions. "Grab the buoy! Hey, the buoy!" But Cameron, either disoriented, caught in the excitement, or struggling against the pull of unseen currents, swam past it. The water around him swallowed the sound of voices, and within seconds, he vanished from view. Panic erupted aboard the ship. Friends scrambled along the deck, pointing frantically, calling out his name, their laughter and joy replaced with horror and disbelief. The crew initiated emergency protocols, radios crackling as calls for help were sent into the night, while the students could only watch helplessly as the darkness claimed him. The search was immediate and relentless. The U.S. Coast Guard and the Royal Bahamas Defense Force scoured the area for days, deploying air crews, boats, and search patterns across more than 325 square miles of open ocean. Authorities warned that the waters were known to be shark-infested, a chilling reality that weighed heavily on everyone hoping for a miracle. Every hour that passed without a sighting eroded hope, turning the initial panic into a quiet, sinking dread. By May 27th, after days of exhaustive searching and endless prayers, Cameron Robbins was officially declared lost at sea. His body was never found, leaving a gaping void that no words could fill for his family, friends, and an entire community. Back in Baton Rouge, the grief was palpable. Memorials were held, baseball fields fell silent, and the laughter Cameron had shared with teammates and classmates became a haunting echo. Stories of his humor, kindness, and fierce competitive spirit circulated among those who loved him, each memory now tinged with a sorrowful ache. Friends and strangers alike were left grappling with the cruel reality of how a single dare, something meant to be fun, could spiral into irreversible tragedy. Cameron's story serves as a sobering reminder that the line between thrill and disaster is thinner than we ever realize, and that even the bravest leap, fueled by confidence and youthful daring, can have consequences that last forever. It was the early morning of December 29, 2024, in Ethiopia's Sidama region, a quiet day that would soon turn into one of the country's darkest. On the narrow Jalana Bridge, a truck overloaded with passengers crept forward, its metal frame groaning under the weight. Inside and atop the vehicle, people clung tightly to some weary laborers returning from long days at a coffee plantation, their clothes still dusted with harvest soil. Others dressed in bright colors, fresh from a nearby wedding that had filled the night with laughter and music. For most, it was meant to be nothing more than a simple ride home. Instead, it became a journey into tragedy. As the truck neared the midpoint of the bridge, its tires hugged the crumbling edge of a road notorious for sharp bends and sudden drops. Then, without warning, the driver lost control. The truck swerved violently, skidded, and in an instant of horror, it broke through the side barrier, plunging straight into the Ganale Doria River below. The sound was deafening, metal twisting, glass shattering, and then silence as the vehicle vanished beneath the rushing water, taking dozens of passengers with it. What followed was chaos. Villagers sprinted to the scene, diving into the muddy current, shouting names into the air thick with panic. They clawed through the wreckage, searching for anyone still breathing. Slowly, the river began to release its victims' bodies, surfacing one by one, pulled onto the banks where blue tarps were laid out in grim rows. 68 men and 3 women were gone in seconds, families shattered, entire communities paralyzed by grief. Some parents found their children lifeless. Others realized they had no one left to search for. A handful of survivors were rescued. 4 in total pulled from the water, battered, unconscious, barely clinging to life. They were rushed to Bona General Hospital. One in such critical condition he had to be transferred to a larger facility miles away. Their testimonies were faint and broken, but the horror in their eyes said everything. The screech of the tires, the desperate screams as water filled the truck, the crushing silence afterward. Officials later confirmed what locals had long feared: the truck had been severely overloaded, far beyond capacity. Passengers were squeezed inside shoulder to shoulder, with others perched on top of the cabin, holding on as the vehicle swayed dangerously. Witnesses said the truck missed the bridge entirely at the curve, plunging headfirst into the river like a falling stone. It was the kind of tragedy many in Ethiopia knew too well: preventable, predictable, and devastating. By nightfall, the Galana riverbank had transformed into a scene of mourning. Families wept over rows of covered bodies, their cries echoing across the valley as the sun disappeared behind the hills. Rescuers stood in silence, drained and mud-soaked, staring at the wreckage that had claimed 71 lives. For Ethiopia, it was another entry in a long, heartbreaking pattern. The nation has one of Africa's highest rates of road fatalities, where overloaded trucks, poor road conditions, and weak enforcement turn everyday journeys into deadly gambles. But for Sidama's people, this wasn't just another statistic. It was the loss of brothers, sisters, parents, and friends whose lives extinguished in a single plunge off the Jalana Bridge, leaving an entire community drowning in grief. It was Sunday blue skies over Monza, the roar of engines echoing through the grandstands, and the world's best drivers battling for glory. But on September 10, 1961, the Italian Grand Prix turned into one of the darkest days in Formula One history. At the heart of it was Wolfgang von Trips, a German aristocrat, a count by birth, and a rising star behind the wheel of Ferrari's Scarlet Machine. Fans called him Taffy, a name that carried warmth and admiration. He was leading the World Championship, poised to make history. But fate had something else in store. On the second lap, Von Trips and Jim Clark raced side by side down Monza's long straight, two men chasing immortality at over 200 km/h. Then, in a split second, everything went wrong. The two cars made contact with Clark's front wheel, clipped Von Trips's rear. The Ferrari jolted violently, lifted into the air like a missile, and then horror. It vaulted over the barrier and into the crowd. The scream of the engine was replaced by chaos metal twisting, people running, and silence falling over the grandstands that just moments before had been cheering. Von Trips never made it to the hospital. He was gone instantly, thrown from the wreck. 15 spectators were also killed, men, women, even children, standing too close to the dream that had suddenly turned into a nightmare. The scene was indescribable. In a sport where danger was always part of the thrill, this was something else, a tragedy that shattered the illusion of safety for both drivers and fans alike. That day changed Formula One forever. It forced the world to confront a question no one wanted to ask. What happens when speed, ambition, and human error collide head-on? The aftermath was grim. Ferrari withdrew from the rest of the season, despite already securing the Constructors' Championship. Von Trips, who had been leading the title race, was posthumously declared runner-up, losing by just 1 point to his teammate Phil Hill. He had been more than just a driver. He was a pioneer who brought nobility to the cockpit. Born into a Rhineland noble family, Von Trips grew up in a castle in Kerpen, near Cologne. He struggled with diabetes, often carrying high-sugar snacks in his car to fight off low blood sugar during races. But nothing stopped him. From his first podiums in the late 1950s to his hard-fought victories at Zandvoort and Silverstone in 1961, he had climbed his way to the top of the motorsport world. Behind the polished smile and refined manner, there was a man obsessed with racing, willing to risk everything for the pursuit of speed. And yet, it was that same passion that claimed him. The sight of his car soaring off the track, the screams from the stands, and the eerie silence that followed still haunt Formula One's collective memory. The FIA soon banned races on circuits with steeply banked corners. Safety barriers, spectator zones, and car designs were all re-examined. But for many, the scars of that day never truly healed. In a cruel twist of fate, Von Trips had built a karting track in his hometown of Kerpen just before his death, the same track where, decades later, Michael Schumacher would begin his journey to becoming one of the greatest Formula One drivers of all time. It's as if Von Trips's spirit lingered there, guiding another German prodigy to fulfill the destiny he never could. It began as a seemingly innocent sleepover in Florida, a night filled with laughter, games, and the kind of mischief children often indulge in. 8-year-old Kihari Pope was there with her cousin and friends, enjoying the excitement of being together. The game of choice was truth or dare, a test of bravery, of curiosity, of childish courage. What started as harmless fun soon took a turn no one could have foreseen. Somewhere in the swirl of giggles and dares, someone challenged Kihari to drink boiling water through a straw. The dare seemed absurd, even comical, yet Kihari, trusting in the thrill of the game and the encouragement of her peers, accepted. She lifted the straw to her lips and sipped the scalding liquid. Immediately, screams tore through the room. The boiling water seared her mouth, throat, and lungs. Her tiny body convulsed in agony as she collapsed to the floor. Adults rushed her to the hospital, frantic and fearful. Doctors discovered the horrifying extent of her injuries, severe internal burns that had destroyed the lining of her throat and damaged her lungs. Kihari was placed in intensive care, her small body struggling for every breath. Multiple surgeries followed, but each procedure only underscored the brutal reality her injuries were catastrophic. Her airway had been irreparably damaged, and despite the relentless efforts of the medical team, her condition worsened. For months, Kihari fought for life. She endured unimaginable pain, a battle far beyond her years. A tracheotomy left her with difficulty speaking and breathing, each breath a struggle, each moment a reminder of that fateful dare. Her family watched in helpless despair as complications continued to mount, their hearts breaking with each setback. Then, in the early hours of July 31st, 2017, Kihari Pope passed away, just 4 months after that tragic sleepover. She was only 8 years old. The news sent shockwaves across her community, leaving parents horrified and questioning how a simple game could lead to such a devastating loss. Social media carried warnings and grief, as schools and families tried to impress upon children the deadly consequences of reckless dares. Kihari's story became a cautionary tale, a tragic lesson in the fragile line between curiosity and danger. Her young life, full of potential and innocence, was snatched away in a single, horrifying moment. A moment that began with laughter and ended in heartbreak. Friends and family were left traumatized, haunted by the memory of what had happened, and determined to ensure that no other child would face such a cruel fate. It was a humid morning on September 21st, 1989, in Alton, Texas, a quiet town in the Rio Grande Valley where life usually moved slow. Children filled the yellow school bus with laughter and chatter, unaware that within minutes, their morning ride would become one of the deadliest school tragedies in Texas history. The bus, carrying over 80 students aged 12 to 19, rolled down Farm to Market Road 676. It had just picked up its last passenger when a Dr. Pepper delivery truck, operated by Valley Coca-Cola Bottling Company, sped through a stop sign. In an instant, impact. Witnesses said the sound was deafening. Metal folding into metal, glass exploding, screams tearing through the air. The force sent the bus careening off the road into a massive caliche pit, a water-filled crater left from mining. There was no guardrail, no barrier, just open space. The bus plunged straight into 10 feet of muddy water. Inside, chaos. Students clawed for windows, gasping as icy water surged in. Within a minute, the bus disappeared beneath the surface. The windows were too small, the exits too few, and the dark water made escape nearly impossible. Survivors said it felt like the world had gone black all at once. Rescuers arrived quickly. Border Patrol agents, police, volunteers, but visibility was zero. They dove blind, breaking glass, pulling out whoever they could. Parents stood at the edge, screaming names, praying for movement. Bodies were brought up one by one until the pit grew silent. 21 students were gone, 19 that morning, 2 more days later. None had suffered visible injuries. They had simply drowned, trapped inside the bus that once carried them safely to school. In Alton, grief was unbearable. The next day's football game turned into a memorial, hundreds gathering under the Texas sun to mourn. But as time passed, sorrow gave way to blame. Truck driver Ruben Perez was charged with 21 counts of negligent homicide but later acquitted. He lived with torment, saying, "Even though now I'm free, I still feel so much for the kids. I don't know if I'll ever get better. Lawsuits followed. The bottling company and the bus manufacturer paid over $150 million in settlements, but the money only deepened wounds. Some called it blood money. Neighbors grew distant, friendships ended, and a once-united community splintered under grief and resentment. The tragedy did lead to change, and guardrails were finally installed along FM 676 and other pits nearby. A junior high school and park were later named in memory of the 21 victims, marked with white crosses and a statue of Christ. Every September, parents still gather there, placing flowers beneath their children's names. It was supposed to be just another race weekend, a blur of speed, glory, and noise echoing through the hills of Imola. The 1994 San Marino Grand Prix had drawn thousands under the Italian sun, all waiting to see one man, Ayrton Senna da Silva, the Brazilian genius, the three-time world champion, and the very soul of Formula One. For millions, Senna wasn't just a driver. He was a symbol of courage and perfection, a man who danced on the edge of danger. But that Sunday, May 1st, became the darkest day in Formula One history, the day the sport's heart stopped beating. The weekend had already felt cursed. On Friday, Senna's close friend Rubens Barrichello crashed at 225 km/h, his car flipping violently. Senna ran to the medical center and waited outside until Barrichello regained consciousness, a rare moment of relief in a weekend filled with dread. But the next day brought tragedy. During Saturday qualifying, Roland Ratzenberger, a rookie Austrian driver, struck a wall at over 300 km/h after his front wing failed. The impact killed him instantly. When Sid Watkins, F1's top doctor, told Senna the news, the champion's eyes filled with tears. Watkins urged him to quit, to go fishing instead. But Senna quietly replied, "I can't stop." Racing was his life. That night, he called his girlfriend, Adrienne Galisteu, and broke down. He spoke of the fear, the crashes, the feeling that something terrible was coming. Still, on Sunday morning, he showed up determined. Over breakfast, he even made peace with his old rival Alain Prost, talking about reviving the Drivers' Association to improve safety, as if sensing what was ahead. At the start of the race, chaos struck. JJ Leto stalled on the grid, and Pedro Lamy crashed into him, sending debris into the stands. The safety car came out, but it was too slow. Senna's tires began cooling, losing grip. After 5 laps, the race restarted. On lap 7, the blue and white Williams flew through Tamburello, Imola's fastest corner. Then, disaster struck. At 309 km/h, Senna's steering column suddenly snapped. His car veered off track, skidding across the grass before slamming into a concrete wall at 211 km/h. The impact was brutal. The front wheel tore free, the suspension exploded, and a suspension arm pierced his helmet above the right eye. For a few seconds, the world held its breath. Millions watching live hoped he'd climb out, but he didn't move. Sid Watkins arrived within moments. When I lifted his eyelids, he later said, it was clear he had a massive brain injury. As we lifted him from the car, he sighed, and I felt his spirit depart. Senna was airlifted to Bologna's Maggiore Hospital, but at 6:37 p.m. he was pronounced dead. He was just 34. Inside his wrecked car, officials found a folded Austrian flag Senna had planned to raise at the finish line to honor Ratzenberger, who had died the day before. It was a heartbreaking final gesture from a man who carried others' pain as deeply as his own. In Brazil, millions poured into the streets. His coffin, draped in the national flag, moved through São Paulo as the city fell silent. Even those who never followed racing felt the loss because Senna was more than a driver. He embodied passion, faith, and humanity in a sport built on danger. His death changed Formula One forever. The FIA immediately launched sweeping safety reforms, stronger cockpits, improved crash barriers, faster medical response, and redesigned circuits. For 2 decades after Senna's death, no driver was killed during a Formula One race. Imola was never the same. The Tamburello corner was reshaped into a chicane, with a scar left where the greatest of them all took his final breath. It started as an ordinary night in Heysham, Lancashire, but what unfolded in the early hours of May 28, 2018, would leave a community shaken for years. A neighbor looked out her window and saw flames licking the walls of 94-year-old Mary Gregory's bungalow. Firefighters rushed to the scene, finding her unconscious in the conservatory. Overcome by smoke, she was quickly treated by paramedics and rushed to Royal Lancaster Hospital. But despite their efforts, she died 4 days later. At first, the fire was believed to be a tragic accident, likely caused by a dropped cigarette. Mrs. Gregory was a lifelong smoker, and with dementia, her vulnerabilities made the accident seem plausible. The coroner ruled it accidental, the case closed, and life appeared to move on. But beneath the surface, a dark secret was simmering. Weeks after the funeral, during a game of Truth or Dare, 17-year-old Tiernan Darnton whispered to two friends, his voice both casual and chilling, "I have a secret I haven't told anyone. I may have killed someone." His friends laughed it off, assuming he was joking, but Tiernan made them promise to stay silent. The words should have remained idle whispers of teenage bravado, but they were only the beginning of a horrifying confession that would shake everyone who knew him. In May 2019, during a counseling session, Tiernan hinted at the truth, speaking of a friend who could send me to prison because of what he knows. His words dripped with an unsettling pride. When pressed, he admitted to the counselor, yes, confirming the worst fears they could imagine. Police reopened the case, uncovering evidence far more disturbing than anyone could have predicted. Drawings of Mrs. Gregory's floor plan littered his room, labeled with "good hiding place" and "quick exit." Investigators discovered that he had set the curtains on fire, unplugged the phone, disabled a smoke alarm, and placed a table in front of the conservatory doors, blocking her escape. His searches online painted a dark, obsessive mind. Terms like under 18 murder, "I'm a murderer," "I'm a monster and I'm going to hell," and "urge to kill again" littered his devices. The court would later hear Tiernan's chilling rationale. He believed he was ending his step-grandmother's suffering from dementia. Yet the horror of that night could not be mitigated. Mary Gregory, trapped by the table he had placed in front of the door, fought for her life, screaming as the smoke consumed the bungalow. Neighbors heard her desperate cries, and the image of a frail woman struggling to survive a deliberate blaze left a haunting scar on the community. Her final days were spent in hospital, her suffering compounded by the cruel intention of someone who should have cared for her. Tiernan Darnton, by then 21, was sentenced at Preston Crown Court to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 15 years. Mrs. Justice Yip described the crime as calculated and cruel, emphasizing how Tiernan's fascination with killers and his dark thoughts had culminated in an act of unspeakable violence. The judge painted a vivid picture of the horror Mary Gregory endured in her final moments, a horror made all the more chilling by its preventability. This was not a story of a tragic accident, but of a calculated betrayal of trust, a dark secret hidden behind the guise of youth. Tiernan's confession, during a game of Truth or Dare, would ultimately unravel a lie that had allowed a community to grieve under false pretenses, leaving behind a legacy of shock, disbelief, and sorrow. It stands as a grim reminder that sometimes the most terrifying secrets are the ones kept closest to home. It was the dark, misty morning of January 27, 2021, in the west region of Cameroon. The air was thick with fog along the winding roads near the cliff of Jang, a stretch of highway notorious for sharp turns and steep descents. It was around 3:30 a.m., and a 70-seat passenger bus made its way uphill, carrying families, workers, and travelers returning from the bustling coastal city of Douala to Bafoussam. Some passengers were dozing, others chatting quietly, unaware that within moments their journey would end in unimaginable horror. Out of the darkness came a blinding light from a fuel truck, speeding downhill, its brakes already failing. Witnesses later said it was moving too fast, perhaps over 120 kilometers per hour, the driver fighting to control it on the slick, fog-drenched slope. But there was no time to react. In an instant, the truck slammed head-on into the bus. The explosion that followed was so violent it could be heard miles away. Within seconds, the two vehicles were engulfed in flames, a roaring inferno of twisted metal and burning fuel. Inside the bus, dozens were trapped, unable to break the windows or reach the doors as the fire spread. The smell of fuel filled the air. People screamed, clawed at the seats, trying desperately to escape, but the heat was unbearable. Flames swallowed everything. By the time rescuers arrived, the night sky glowed orange over the cliffside, and the bus was a shell of blackened steel. 53 people were dead, many burned beyond recognition. 29 others, their bodies seared and blistered, were pulled out alive and rushed to hospitals in Chiang and Bafoussam. For some, survival would come with scars that would last forever. Governor Awa Fonka Augustine stood at the scene later that morning, staring at what was left. He confirmed what many feared: the truck had been illegally carrying fuel and had suffered brake failure. The dense fog had made visibility nearly impossible. A speeding truck illegally transporting fuel ran into a 70-seat bus, he said solemnly, his words echoing over the smoldering wreck. A collision between the truck and the bus sparked uncontrollable fire, which ravaged the vehicles and their occupants. The devastation was so complete that 22 of the bodies could not even be identified. Blue sheets covered the remains as families gathered in disbelief, hoping to find loved ones among the survivors. For many, there was nothing left to recognize, only ashes and twisted wreckage. Police and emergency teams worked through the night, pulling remains from the charred metal and searching for clues. 3 men, occupants of the truck, had survived and fled the scene immediately after the crash, but authorities would later order their arrest. The tragedy sparked national outrage. Road safety advocate Manfred Missimikan called it a succession of negligence, pointing out that the fuel truck had no legal right to transport such a load, and that Cameroon's winding mountain roads were too dangerous for night travel. For locals, though, this wasn't just another headline, it was a nightmare that felt too familiar. Cameroon's roads are narrow and treacherous, carved into steep hills and often cloaked in fog. Vehicles are overloaded, drivers overworked, and safety rules rarely enforced. People begged the government to ban night journeys or to repair the mountain routes that had claimed so many lives. The 1967 Monaco Grand Prix was meant to be a celebration of speed and elegance, the glamour of the French Riviera meeting the thrill of Formula One. The streets of Monte Carlo shimmered under the Mediterranean sun as engines roared between yachts and cheering spectators. But that afternoon, beauty turned to horror in an instant. Behind the wheel of his scarlet Ferrari was Lorenzo Bandini, adored in Italy, respected across the racing world, and known for his humility despite the fame that came with driving for Enzo Ferrari. He had come so close to greatness before, and many believed this would be his day. For 82 laps, Bandini chased Denny Hume's Brabham, pushing harder than ever. His car skimmed the barriers with each turn, the crowd holding its breath. Then, as he entered the harbor chicane, one of Monaco's most treacherous corners, fate struck. His Ferrari's rear left wheel clipped the guardrail, sending the car into a pole before flipping into a wall of straw bales. The impact was violent, and then came the fire. In moments, Monte Carlo vanished beneath a plume of thick, black smoke. The red Ferrari became a fireball. Marshals rushed in with extinguishers, but the flames were relentlessly feeding on leaking fuel and ignited straw. Bandini was trapped beneath the wreckage, motionless, as the heat grew unbearable. Spectators screamed from balconies and yachts, helpless as the inferno consumed everything. Over a minute passed before rescuers could reach him. The straw bales, meant for safety, had become a death trap. When Bandini was finally pulled out, it was too late. His body was covered in third-degree burns, his chest crushed, his face unrecognizable. He was rushed to Princess Grace Hospital, where doctors fought desperately for 3 days. On May 10, 1967, Lorenzo Bandini was gone. He was just 31. The image of his Ferrari burning beneath the Monaco sun remains one of the most haunting in F1 history. Flames reflecting off the blue harbor, panic echoing through the narrow streets. The horror wasn't just in the crash, but in the helplessness of watching a man consumed by the dream he lived for. Bandini's rise made it even more tragic. Born in Libya and raised in Florence, he had started as a mechanic's apprentice before working his way to Formula One. He'd once fixed cars in a Milan garage before earning his first podium in Monaco, the very same place that would take his life. By 1967, he was Ferrari's top driver, a national hero and a world champion in the making. But fate, cruel as ever, intervened. His death shook the sport. The horrifying images from Monaco led to swift change. Straw bales were banned, marshals were better trained, and new safety barriers were introduced. Bandini's sacrifice forced Formula One to confront its dangers and evolve. More than 100,000 people attended his funeral in Reggiolo, many in tears as his coffin passed draped in Ferrari red. Enzo Ferrari was devastated that the man who brought so much pride to his team had perished in its service. What makes Bandini's death unforgettable isn't just the flames or the crash, but the cruel irony that he had once helped film a movie, Grand Prix, suggesting that very harbor chicane for a crash scene, unaware it would become his own. It was a warm summer evening in 2024, the kind of night teenagers live for long, carefree, and seemingly full of endless possibilities. But for 15-year-old Zakaria Char and 16-year-old Ryan Al Nasser, what started as a casual dare in a group chat would turn into a tragedy no one could have imagined. The boys, part of a circle of friends challenging one another to prove their courage, were egged on to jump from the 12-mile river bridge into the deep waters of Lake Hartwell, South Carolina. The messages pinged relentlessly, daring them, pressuring them, pushing them toward a risk that felt thrilling in the moment, but deadly in reality. Later that night, they arrived at the bridge, hearts pounding and adrenaline surging. The drop to the water below was steep, the lake dark and unknowable beneath the stars. Without hesitation, both teens climbed onto the railing and jumped. For a heartbeat, the scene seemed almost cinematic, a moment of daring youth frozen in time. But the lake did not deliver the thrill they expected. Seconds passed, then minutes. Neither boy surfaced. Panic swept through the friends watching from shore. Someone screamed for help, someone else called 911. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, but the situation was desperate. Dive teams scoured the water with boats and sonar. Cadaver dogs were brought in, and families held their breath, hoping against hope that the boys would emerge. Yet the lake, deceptively calm from above, had claimed them. Eventually, both bodies were recovered, roughly 8 feet apart, lying 15 feet beneath the surface. The community was left reeling. Candlelight vigils sprang up along the bridge. Flowers and photos left in memory of 2 young lives cut tragically short. Parents, neighbors, and classmates were forced to confront the deadly consequences of peer pressure amplified by social media. As authorities examined the group chat where the fatal dare had originated, counselors were brought into schools to support traumatized students, while families warned their children about the dangers of online challenges that can spiral out of control in an instant. Rayan, a dedicated soccer player, was remembered by his coach as a vibrant young man whose loss cut deep. "I would give up every trophy, and even my life for him to be back with his family," the coach wrote. The grief echoed across the town of Pickens County, where the bridge that had once seemed innocuous became a haunting memorial. This tragedy serves as a stark, heartbreaking reminder that even a moment of recklessness, fueled by bravado and peer pressure, can have irreversible consequences. 2 promising young lives were lost in a heartbeat, leaving a community to grapple with the devastating aftermath of a dare that should never have been taken. It was the afternoon of September 17, 1963, in the quiet farmlands outside Schwaller, California. A flatbed truck, crudely converted into a bus, rumbled down a dusty private road, carrying 58 migrant farm workers. They were exhausted after a long, back-breaking day harvesting celery, packed shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches beneath a flimsy canopy. For most, this was just another ride back to camp. For 32 of them, it would be their last. The driver, Francisco Pancho Espinosa, was a foreman trusted to transport his crew. The men behind him, many part of the Bracero program, Mexican laborers brought to California to fill agricultural jobs, couldn't see the road ahead or speak to him over the roar of the engine. The truck rattled east along Thomas Ranch Road, a narrow lane that cut across a lonely railroad track. There were no warning lights, no crossing gates, not even a sign. Just two lines of steel running through the dirt, glinting faintly in the afternoon light. From the south, a Southern Pacific freight train thundered toward them, 4 diesel locomotives pulling 71 loaded cars at nearly 65 miles per hour. The engineer saw the truck too late. He yanked the emergency brake. Sparks screamed from the wheels, but the train was too heavy, too fast. Espinosa crept forward, unaware of the danger, and in one horrifying instant, metal met metal. The impact was cataclysmic. The train tore through the truck bus like paper, splintering wood and steel, hurling bodies into the air. The wreckage was dragged for nearly half a mile down the track, scattering twisted debris and lifeless forms along the rails. Those who survived the first impact were flung onto the gravel, battered, broken, and bleeding. Some were cut by their own harvest knives, others impaled by splintered boards. One man was severed in half beneath the wheels. Witnesses said the aftermath was indescribable. 23 died instantly, and 9 more succumbed to their injuries soon after. 15 ambulances rushed to the scene, but the horror was overwhelming. The tracks slick with blood, the air thick with smoke and cries of pain. One rescuer would later recall that blood poured out of an ambulance, like water. The victims ranged from 19 to 59 years old, fathers, brothers, and sons who had left behind dozens of children in Mexico, depending on them for survival. When the chaos subsided, only Espinosa, the driver, was found unhurt. Every passenger had been crushed, burned, or thrown from the vehicle. For days, authorities struggled to identify the dead. Most of the workers were known only by numbers, not names, a dehumanizing hallmark of the Bracero system. The FBI had to be called in to help with identification, while families in Mexico waited in agony for word that never came. The funeral arrangements became a public scandal. Officials in Salinas and the Mexican consulate argued bitterly over who would claim the bodies. Newspapers described a macabre funeral hassle, a final indignity for men who had died serving the very system that erased their identities. When the dispute finally ended, a mass funeral was held at Palma High School, where over 9,000 mourners filled the stands. Coffins, draped in flowers, stood side by side, each representing a life lost to indifference and exploitation. In the weeks that followed, investigators searched for answers. The Interstate Commerce Commission concluded that Espinosa had an unobstructed view of the tracks and blamed him for failing to stop. He insisted he never saw or heard the train through the dust and noise, and some believed his diabetes impaired his vision. Espinosa was charged with 32 counts of manslaughter, but a jury later acquitted him after only 4 days of testimony. Soon after, he fled California, haunted and in fear for his life. Rumors spread that he'd been killed in Mexico by the victims' relatives, though that was never confirmed. Years later, families received modest compensation, a $1.5 million settlement divided among the survivors and heirs, a small price for so much loss. Labor activist Ernesto Galarza investigated the disaster and uncovered the painful truth. These men had been failed by every layer of the system, by employers who cut corners, by officials who ignored safety, and by a government that saw them as numbers instead of names. His report, Tragedy at Schwaller, exposed the exploitation behind the harvest fields that fed the nation. Today, the site of the crash near the intersection of Poleta Road and Broome Road looks ordinary. The tracks are still there, silent and rusted. But for those who remember, the silence is deafening. It was there that 32 men, who came to America chasing dignity and work, were crushed beneath the weight of a system that saw them as invisible. The 1970 Formula One season was supposed to be Jochen Rindt's crowning moment, a year that would finally cement his place among the legends. The Austrian driver had been unstoppable, winning race after race with fearless precision. His Lotus 72, sleek and revolutionary, seemed untouchable on the track. Fans adored him for his bold driving style, his calm confidence, and his ability to find speed where no one else could. Heading into the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, Rindt was on the verge of becoming world champion. No one could have imagined that it would be his final race weekend. During practice on September 5, 1970, tragedy struck. Rint's Lotus hurtled down Monza's long straight at over 200 miles per hour, when suddenly, without warning, the car veered left. The front brake shaft had failed. The Lotus slammed into a poorly installed guardrail, tearing apart on impact. The nose of the car was crushed, the cockpit twisted, and Rint was thrown forward violently despite being strapped in. His seatbelt, fitted in a way that allowed him to move more freely, a common practice among drivers, then slid up his body during the crash. The harness caught his neck instead of his chest, inflicting fatal injuries. The rescue teams rushed to the scene, but there was nothing they could do. Jochen Rindt was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. He was just 28 years old. The news spread like wildfire. Shock rippled through the paddock, the grandstands, and across Europe. Everyone knew Rindt had been destined for greatness, and now that promise was gone in an instant. His wife, Nina, stood silently in the pit lane, watching the car being brought back, her face pale with disbelief. But the cruelest twist came weeks later. Despite his death, Rindt's championship lead was so commanding that no one could surpass his points total. When the season ended, he was officially declared the 1970 Formula One world champion, the only driver in history to win the title posthumously. His name was engraved on the trophy, his legacy immortalized, but the victory felt hollow, shadowed by grief. Rindt's death exposed the dangers that drivers had long accepted as part of the job: the broken guardrails, the lack of runoff areas, the fragile cars. It all came under fire. His passing forced Formula One to face its negligence. In the aftermath, major safety reforms followed: better crash barriers, stricter harness designs, and improved car construction standards. Jochen Rindt's story is one of brilliance cut short by a man who chased perfection and paid the ultimate price. Every corner of Monza still whispers his name, a chilling reminder that even champions aren't immune to the dangers that lurk behind the pursuit of speed.